It began with a silence so heavy it felt unnatural, an absence of sound that settled over a quiet Pennsylvania neighborhood, like a warning no one could quite understand. Neighbors would later recall that something in the air felt off that day, a kind of stillness that made even the wind seem hesitant. But no one could have imagined the horror waiting behind the closed door of the Mohn family home, or the chilling truth that would soon shake an entire community. Before the tragedy, Michael Mohn was the kind of man people described with the warm steadiness reserved for dependable souls. 68 years old, soft-spoken, and deeply devoted to his family, Michael had spent decades building a quiet life defined by service and stability. As an engineer with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, he approached his work the same way he approached fatherhood, with patience, logic, and a calm persistence that grounded those around him. Friends said Michael carried himself like a man who understood responsibility, the sort of person you could trust with anything, from complex environmental projects to the silent burdens his loved ones placed on his shoulders. At home, he was the steady center of the family, the man who fixed what broke, the man who stayed up late to talk through problems, the man who believed that no challenge was too big to be handled with love and level-headed thinking, especially when it came to his son, Justin. For years, Michael had tried to guide Justin to what seemed like a long, winding struggle toward adulthood. Justin was intelligent, bright, even, but his life was marked by instability. Jobs came and went. Routines faltered. Ambition flickered and dimmed. What outsiders saw as potential, Justin felt as pressure. And underneath the surface, something deeper was shifting inside him. Something troubled, something angry, something that would one day break open in the most unimaginable way. Yet despite the mounting tension, Michael never turned his back on him. He offered patience. He offered support. He offered forgiveness more times than those close to the family could count. Because that was who Michael was. A father who refused to give up on his child, even when the child seemed lost in a world he could no longer fully understand. In the days leading up to the tragedy, nothing appeared noticeably alarming from the outside. The house looked ordinary. The routine seemed intact. Michael went to work. Justin remained withdrawn, wrestling with private thoughts no one in the family could decipher. And somewhere within those quiet moments, a chilling decision was slowly forming. One that would destroy the life of a man who had devoted everything to his family and unravel the fragile stability of the son he had tried so desperately to protect. For Michael, life was supposed to continue as it always had. Steady, simple, and filled with the quiet joys of a man who had earned peace after a lifetime of hard work. He had no idea he was living his final day, and in that fragile space between ordinary life and unthinkable tragedy, the seeds of a nightmare were already taking root. Hidden behind a familiar face, inside a home that had once been filled with trust, hope, and unconditional love. This is where the story begins. With a father who loved too deeply, a son drifting into darkness, and a quiet suburban home about to become the center of one of the most disturbing crimes Pennsylvania had ever seen. It was just after sundown on January 30th, 2024, when the quiet inside the Mohn household transformed into something far more sinister, something violent, abrupt, and irreversible. What unfolded within those walls would later be described by hardened investigators as one of the most disturbing scenes they had ever encountered. Inside the home, an argument, or perhaps a long-brewing confrontation, crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. What began as a tense interaction between father and son spiraled with terrifying speed into an eruption of brutality. And in that moment, the fragile bond that had held this family together for decades was obliterated. At the center of it all stood Justin, clutching the 9mm handgun he had purchased only one day earlier. Investigators would later point to this purchase as a chilling sign of intent, a quiet step in a plan no one knew existed until it was far too late. As the two men faced each other, whatever words passed between them died in the air, replaced by the deafening crack of a gunshot. Michael, the man who had spent a lifetime supporting, guiding, and protecting his son, collapsed instantly. But the violence didn't end there. What happened next left even experienced detectives struggling to process what they were witnessing. In a moment that defied logic, compassion, and humanity, Justin crossed into a realm of cruelty that few crimes ever approach. With calculated intent, he retrieved a blade, a machete, and carried out an act so grotesque, so deeply unnatural, that would send waves of revulsion through the entire community. But the horror didn't just stop there, because Justin wasn't finished. Driven by a warped sense of ideology and extremism, he recorded a nearly 15-minute video, holding up his father's severed head as he spoke directly to the camera. In the video, Justin launched into an anti-government tirade, filled with rhetoric about conspiracies and vengeance. He spoke of treason, of punishing federal employees, of executing judges, politicians, and public servants. He declared himself part of a militia and framed the murder as a symbolic act, an act he believed others should replicate. There was no remorse in his voice, no grief, no acknowledgement of the humanity he had just destroyed, only conviction. He uploaded the video to YouTube. For those who saw the footage before it was removed, the emotional impact was immediate and devastating. Viewers described feeling sick, horrified, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Some thought it was a movie prop or a morbid prank, until police later confirmed its authenticity. The video gained thousands of views in a matter of hours before YouTube moderators deleted it for graphic violence, but by then the damage was done. The horror had spread far beyond a single home. By the time the police arrived at the house, Justin was gone. Law enforcement began tracing Justin's movements using his cell phone, discovering that he wasn't aimlessly fleeing. He was heading toward Fort Indian Town Gap, a military training facility. Justin arrived at the gates of the military installation and was apprehended there after attempting to enter the secure military installation in a warped attempt to mobilize the National Guard against the federal government. He was found with a loaded Sig Sauer 9mm pistol and camping and survival gear. The same calmness he displayed in the video lingered during his arrest, a blank, detached demeanor that chilled those who apprehended him. Back in Levittown, the community began to buzz with whispered conversations, frantic phone calls, and breaking news alerts. People who had known the Mohn family for years struggled to reconcile the horrifying reports with a quiet father and son they thought they understood. But the video left no room for doubt. It was raw evidence of a mind untethered from reality, of an ideology that had metastasized into something monstrous. And as the clip spread, shared, and re-uploaded before disappearing into digital evidence folders, it became painfully clear. The crime wasn't only meant to end a life. It was meant to send a message carved in violence, spoken through fear and broadcast across the world in the most horrifying way imaginable. As investigators dug deeper into Justin's life in the hours and days after his arrest, a terrifying truth began to unfold. The murder of his father was not an emotional outburst or a crime of sudden rage. It was the execution of a premeditated blueprint, a plan pieced together in fragments of writings, digital files, and disturbing purchases that pointed to a long descent into extremist thinking. The first clue lay in the weapon itself. Justin had walked into a gun store on January 29th, 2024, one day before the murder, and purchased a 9mm handgun. He had willingly surrendered his medical marijuana card, not because he no longer needed it, but because the law forbade firearm purchases for users of medical cannabis. Investigators saw this as a calculated step, not a spontaneous decision. He had cleared the legal obstacles with quiet precision. Then came the documents found after his arrest. A USB drive filled with photographs of federal buildings and what appeared to be instructions for constructing homemade explosives. These were not the idle downloads of a curious mind. These were materials that mirrored the rhetoric he had been spreading online for years. They hinted at broader intentions, suggesting that the murder of his father might have been intended as the first act in a much larger campaign of violence. Inside Justin's notebooks, detectives found pages of fragmented thoughts, angry declarations against the government, fantasies of rebellion, and lists that read like twisted task sheets. One page, disturbingly titled Plan B, contained two words written with chilling simplicity: boom and slice. Prosecutors later argued that this wasn't metaphorical language. It was a violent contingency plan, one he ultimately carried out with cold precision. Justin was eventually charged to court. When the doors to the Bucks County courtroom opened, the atmosphere was thick with a tension that felt almost physical. Reporters whispered. Family members clutched tissues. Officers sat stiffly in the back row. Everyone inside knew this would not be a trial about who committed the crime. Justin had already admitted that. This was a trial about why and about the terrifying absence of remorse that followed. Justin entered the courtroom with the same unsettling composure he displayed in his video. There was no trembling, no nervous glances, no flicker of humanity on his face. Instead, he walked with a cold steadiness that made even the most seasoned officers uneasy. It was not arrogance. It was detachment. Throughout the proceedings, the courtroom heard details that made some avert their eyes and others fight back tears. Prosecutors laid out the timeline with unwavering precision. The gun purchase, the shooting, the decapitation, the video, the attempt to flee, and the extremist materials found during his arrest. Each fact felt like another blow, another layer of cruelty that deepened the tragedy. When Justin addressed court, his explanation only added to the horror. He claimed he had not intended to kill his father. He merely wanted to perform a citizen's arrest for what he called treason. He described the encounter as though it were a failed mission rather than the brutal killing of the man who raised him. He insisted that his father resisted, and that the shooting was an unavoidable consequence. Witnesses for the defense attempted to paint a picture of Justin's declining mental stability, his years of isolation, his extremist online activity, his growing detachment from reality. They described a man slipping deeper into paranoia, a man whose mind was tightening around conspiracy theories until everything familiar, even his father, became distorted. But prosecutors countered with equal force. They argued that Justin's actions showed organization, clarity, and intent, not confusion. The preparation, the purchase of gun, the stage recording, the grotesque mutilation, the careful upload of the video, none of it pointed to a moment of madness. It pointed to purpose. Through it all, Justin sat expressionless, occasionally nodding, occasionally scribbling notes, occasionally staring off into the middle distance, as if the trial were a minor inconvenience rather than a reckoning for one of the most shocking crimes in Pennsylvania's history. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence when Justin Mohn was pronounced guilty. On July 11, 2025, after a bench trial that reviewed so many pieces of evidence and testimony from witnesses, the judge found him guilty of first-degree murder and related charges for the brutal killing and decapitation of his father, Michael Mohn. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In addition to murder, Mohn was convicted on multiple counts: terrorism, abuse of a corpse, weapons violations, criminal use of a communication facility, and other charges. During sentencing, the judge, Stephen A. Farrar, condemned the crime as unspeakable, acknowledging the depth of cruelty in premeditated violence against one's own father. Mohn's own words at the sentencing hearing sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. Though he apologized to his family when prompted by his attorney, he made it clear he felt no real guilt, calling his act justice. He even suggested he could be part of a prisoner exchange involving U.S. soldiers jailed in Russia. In the victim impact statements, Mohn's mother and siblings delivered heartbreaking recollections of Michael, a devoted father, husband, and longtime federal engineer. Love for his kindness, humor, and stability. The pain, disbelief, and sense of betrayal were raw, especially given that Michael had supported Justin for years, emotionally and financially. The prosecutor, Jennifer Shorn, declared that the verdict ensured community safety, stressing that Mohn's complete and utter lack of remorse and the calculated nature of the violence warranted the harshest penalty. At the end, the courtroom understood justice had been served in a legal sense. But the wound cut deeper than any courtroom can heal, a family forever shattered, a community rocked, and a disturbing reminder how ideology and rage can destroy lives in the most horrific ways. The case became the first in Pennsylvania to secure a terrorism conviction under the state statute, a sign that the justice system recognizes was more than a domestic murder. Prosecutors argued, and the court agreed, that Justin used his father's death not just as a personal act, but as a political statement, a call to violence against federal employees, a demonstration of hatred toward the government. For many, the case became a grim warning about how ideological extremism can drive people to horrific acts, even when they once appeared normal or were loved and cared for. Despite the verdict and the life sentence, many questions remain, questions that may never be fully answered. What exactly triggered Justin's transformation? Was it a single event, a series of disappointments, or a deeper psychological breakdown? How much of his extremist ideology was rooted in genuine belief, And how much was a product of mental illness or delusion? Could Michael's family, or anyone close, have intervened in a meaningful way before it was too late? For survivors, for communities, for anyone watching, this story demands that we keep asking hard questions about mental health, about radicalization, about warning signs we might dismiss until it's too late. In the end, this crime may be closed in the legal sense. The murderer is behind bars. The verdict has been delivered, but the emotional and psychological wounds remain open, perhaps for a lifetime. There are no winners here. Only grief, only loss, only the cold reminder that human lives will be destroyed not by strangers, but by those we think we know best. What haunts me most, and should haunt you, is this. The horror was not random. It was carefully planned. It was ideologically motivated. It was unthinkable. If you found yourself shaken by this story, I want you to remember Michael, not the victim, not the symbol. A man, a father, a husband, a life cut short. And I want you to reflect on what could be happening behind closed doors, under silent pain or rage, hidden by smiles or silence, until it's too late. Drop your theories in the comments below, and if you want more deep, emotional true crime breakdowns, hit the like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. And remember, stay aware, stay safe, and stay curious.